Hi, I'm Brandon Trashy and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a full stripped down video of the Ares Amoeba AM-013, also known as the Honeybadger. I'm going to be taking this all the way apart to the gearbox and then taking the gearbox apart itself. A lot of the steps for this gun are going to be pretty similar for every M4 platform. There is going to be some slight differences along the way, but if you do want to use this as a guide to take your gun apart, you will be able to. So what I'm going to do is change camera angles so it's slightly closer to the gun, and then we'll proceed from there.
So we've changed camera angles, we've got the gun all laid out, we've got a couple of tools here, we may need some others, but at the moment I've got a Torx screwdriver bit which is going to help me remove the stock, a small screwdriver just for pushing the gearbox pin out, and a Phillips screwdriver here, hopefully that you can seal that. So let's get into taking it apart. Main things to do first is the push pins on the body. So this one for me and the Ares, you can just give that a push with your finger, and then the front one you may need just a screwdriver, give that a little bit of a tap through, and that's going to come out the other side. That allows you to move this top bit of body with mine, little slide forward and lift over, and that is going to remove our upper receiver. So as you can see there, you can see my Pro Win and 7075 Mad Ball barrel in there. So let's just keep that all together, tuck that over to one side, and remove those with the main part of our body from Ares. So the next thing is to remove all of this stock area, just so that we can get down to the gearbox. So push these two pins in either side, so your release clips for your stock, and your stock will slide completely out. Put that over to one side as well, and then your battery cover, so just give the little button a push on the underside of that. We'll stick that over to one side as well. So it just shows how small and compact these guns really are. Next thing you're going to need is your Torx bit screwdriver. For some different guns that may be slightly different as to what you're going to need. Some of these take a long Phillips, some of these take a long flat-headed screwdriver. It really does depend on the make of the gun, but I know with this Ares that it takes a long Torx bit. The screw's quite long, so it's going to take a fair bit of time to get that off. As you can see there, the screw's fairly long, but that's now off. Get that off there. Stick that over to one side. Just pull the battery cable through. Just be a little bit careful with this because it's got a connector on the end. That removes the main segment of our stock, so again, stick it over to one side. The next stage really is the more tricky bit, and something you should be a little bit careful of. So on the bottom of here you can see my pistol grip. We've got two screws either side, and we've got the main adjustment screw in the middle. Best thing to do is leave that main adjustment screw in the middle alone, and just take the outer two off. Now the motor is under a bit of pressure, so I always find I just put my thumb in the middle of here to stop the cover from springing off. Give these little Phillips screws just a quick spin. That's the rear one undone. That's the main one undone. So that's them. As you can see, the cover's trying to lift off, which is a good sign that nothing's catching my spring. So that's that main cover off. Best thing to do now is remember how your motor's set up. So knowing that the positive terminal is towards the back of the housing for the motor, so you can just get a screwdriver in there, give them a little lift off. Be very gentle with these, and pull them out of the way once you're done. Make sure that you try and do no damage to these or anything. These connectors are not massively strong. You can see there's a little bit of grease on the top of the motor here. Sometimes you just need to get a screwdriver like this one, give it a little lift up, just to get it out of that housing. Big to put in there really. I've got this little screwdriver here. You can just give that motor a bit of a pop up, and there it goes, and then you'll be able to slide that out of the body. So you can see the motor that comes in the Ares is really nice. No labelling or anything on there. Long type, so it's the long type shaft. Looking up towards the head of the motor is very clean. There's no bits of metal or rounding off or anything like that, or any signs to show that there's been any damage done by that being pushed into the gearbox. So that is always something to check when you're taking it apart. Make sure that the top of the motor is not got loads of bits of metal all over it. Has got a bit of grease on there, can do a bit of a clean, and we'll clean that up when we go to put that bit back in. So let's put that over to one side, just have a bit of a tidy, put these pins and everything over and out of the way. So I've got the motor off. Next thing to do is remove the pistol grip. Now you're not going to be able to see this due to the lighting, but in here, inside here is 4 screws in the corners. So I'm just going to use this Phillips screwdriver and remove those. As you can see, it's quite a quick process, and I've always sort of had the firm belief that it's never going to hurt you taking apart your guns. You know, worst comes to the worst. You can't get it back together, don't panic, you know, give it another go. And if you get really stuck, there's plenty of techs out there. Probably someone at your local airsoft site is going to get it together for you. These really aren't complicated pieces of kit. You know, my sniper rifle, I always took that apart and just had the confidence in the fact that if it broke, that I could get it back together. And I think that's always something really key. You know, you're out in the field, your gun breaks or something goes down. You know, realistically, if you're there for a 48-hour sim, you know, going back, if the gun jams or something like that, we get a piston jam, you know, going back to the truck quickly, being a, you know, maybe having an hour out of the game, especially if you travelled for it. You know, some of the games that we do, due to where I live, you know, are 5-6 hours away, something like that. So the last thing I'd want to do is get there, have a simple mechanical problem with the gun, you know, and not be able to play. So that should be fairly loose. So once those screws are out, once again, be very careful with the power cables. You can just pull them through the bottom of the pistol, as you can see. The cables come through there. I'm just going to lift these through. Just trying to be very delicate with these cables. What's caught up in there? It's just, there we go, and pull that through. You can see there's a little bit of grease that's come through into that motor housing. Hand's getting a little bit mucky, so what I'm going to do is, now that that is off, just got some tissue here. I'm going to wipe out that pistol grip. Just standard, you know, kitchen towel, whatever. Make sure your hands are nice and clean, or else you're just going to be spreading dirt all over the rest of the gun. Try and get your hands as clean as possible. So we are pretty much very quickly down to the main body of the gun. The next thing really is to remove the mag release, which is going to be going through the body of the gun, and remove this pin here. So a lot of people forget about this. They're pulling on their motor and it doesn't come out because of this reason. So flip this over. On the back here, you can see you've got your mag release with a very small Allen key in the middle. And what you're going to do is just get a 1.5mm Allen key, stick that in there, and just with a light turn, just heard a bit of snap there under pressure, is spin that off. Once that's off, try and keep that to one side with the screw in the top. Lift out your mag release latch and the mag release spring. It's gone inside, there we go. So make sure you keep all of that together. Okay, so we're getting down to the last bits now. Let's give this a little tap, just with the back of a screwdriver. Don't want loads of force on that little pin. Just a light tap will remove it from the gun. If it doesn't pull through one way, just give it a couple of taps back through the other. Sometimes they have a split direction on them. Push that through with just a little thin screwdriver and pull that out the other side. As you see, it's come out. We should be pretty much ready to lift this out now. So again, be very careful at this stage. Don't force anything, you know, don't really give anything too much of a push. Make sure everything's all nice and clear at the back here. Just make sure that there's no damage being done when you're lifting that out. And then you can just make sure after you've lifted that main section out is to just pull the rest of the power cables through. That little quick release, that latch that fell there is the gun latch at the top. Keeps slipping out of my hands. Let's just place that back in place on the body. So we're pretty much stripped down now to just the motor. As you can see from Ares, really nice quality internals. Very clean. There is a few little bits of grease on here, but nothing too major, you know, it's not oozing grease, which is always the worst thing with these. So what I'm going to do now that we're down to a much more smaller confined sort of stage, is quickly zoom in the camera, get it nice and focused up, and then we will be back in a second. So I've zoomed the camera in, as you can see, we've just got the outer shell now of the gearbox. What we're going to do next is on the very back of the Ares gearbox, we've got this little clip here, and it just slides off over the back. Make sure that you do remove this, purely because you can try and pull the gearbox apart, and that is actually going to stop you from doing it. Once that is pulled apart, lay it on a nice flat surface. Make sure that everything's nice and clean around it. Once that's all done, get you a Phillips screwdriver, and this is the worrying bit. I mean, you don't have to go into the detail of completely breaking the gun down all the way to this stage, but for me, I really want to check inside here, make sure it's nice and clean. So let's just get on with it. Give them a nice spin. With Phillips screwdrivers, especially at this size, make sure you're using a good size screwdriver. Now on the end of these little screws, I will try and show you, is these little serrated washers. So I'll just put one on the end of my finger so that you can see it. So on the end of there, you've just got this very small serrated washer. And they actually sit inside that little where the screw comes from, so just make sure you don't lose them. Try and keep them in there if you can, and then just put all of the screws in the configuration that you take them out. So I've got that one there which associates to that hole. Let's spin these off. Again, if they are coming out with them, then you can remove them all. I leave mine in because I'm going to try and lift the top of the gearbox off flat to show you how, all of the internals. One thing I will say about the Ares guns, they're so crisp inside. Really, really nice and clean. As you can see, the detailing on the outside, the nice, really, really good quality bearings. The insides of these guns are really good for how much you pay for them. You can actually pick up these Ares guns super cheap, and I think that's a really good thing, because for people that are starting out in airsoft, the last thing you want to do is go and buy something that you're going to have to replace. And I've run tons and tons of rounds through this gun now, which is essentially why I'm taking it apart. When I say tons, I'm talking about a 48-hour ops where it's used all weekend. It's just had batteries thrown through it, and it's used in the pouring rain. And as you can see here, I'm laying these screws out as they've come out of the gun, so when I go back to putting them together, I can make sure that they're all going back in the right place. It's just that one's come out with its little washer, so we'll just strip that off, put that in there, and that is from down the bottom, and this is the next one. And another thing about these boxes is you can see there the bright blue Ares EFDC chip. That's one of the cool components of this gun, really. That's got all of your fire control and everything in there. So, be careful when taking that off, and I will show you how to do that. So that's the outer housing, essentially, of the gearbox. Now, there is one more screw, which is just, let's try and spin that up, just in here. And you actually have to remove this Ares EFDC chip to actually get to that. So, do that with this screwdriver, just give them a little turn out, and they're quite small screws. They don't take a lot of force, so when you're doing these up or undoing them, don't put loads of downwards pressure on them. Just going to remove them. These are all the same size, these little 4 screws that come off of this little box, but it is something you definitely want to be careful of. Whilst handling. Obviously it's got all of your electronics in here that control your trigger, and if you've got any fire selection set on your gun, then that is all going to be stored on this chip. So just put your nail under the corner, be very, very gentle, and just lift it up, and it comes off like that. So nice and gentle, be careful with that. And then when you go to place it down, what I always do is make sure I don't touch any of the electronics there, and I just face that blue side up. Now you can see that we've got this last screw accessible. I'm just going to give that a little turn, and let's spin that up and off, lay that out next to our EFDC screws. Okay, so pretty much ready now to split the gearbox apart. Make sure that we are all ready to go. One more stage that I would recommend at this, thing to do at this stage, now that we're all stripped down the gearbox apart, is pinch the gearbox, get a big Allen key, which is actually a size 6, and we're going to remove the screw at this stage, remove the spring. So this is something you can do earlier on, but I always leave it until the last, one of the last steps. Give the gun a bit of a turn, give it a pinch, try not to lose any of those washers. A few of them have just sprung out, and this is just going to release all of the tension from the gun. So now that we've got that, hopefully you can see that in frame. Remove that spring guard. So we're just going to pull that spring out, and that means that the gearbox is now under no tension at all. So you can do that a bit earlier on. I always try and do it now. Make sure we haven't lost any of our little on there. Okay, so all apart, all the screws are out. We're pretty much ready to split this up. Doesn't take much force. You are going to hear a few things ping as you begin to take it apart. Again, make sure that you don't lose any of those little washers. Lift that off nice and flat, place it over to one side, and you can see the internals here. We'll try and be nice and quick with this, having this apart so that the video doesn't drag on too long, because as you can see, essentially to get all of it back together, you're going to be doing the same steps in reverse. So you can see in here a few things have pinged into place, but it's not a problem, nothing to worry about. What you can do next, if you want to just remove everything under tension, is this spring here is going to be holding this guide in place. All you want to do is just get a small screwdriver underneath that, release that spring, and that's going to enable you to be able to get to anything. So you can see a few of the gears have moved, but what I will show you very briefly is just to lift this out. Make sure none of these washers go missing. I will hold it up to the cameras. The real solid quality of these gears, they're really nicely made. The edges of them are really nice and clean, and they are obviously full metal internals. So when they say that all the gears and everything are full metal, make sure there's no scoring, there's no marks on them. Make sure that they're nice and clean. Obviously feel free to give these a wipe off. So I'm just going to wipe some of the grease off these. I actually cleaned up these internals recently, and as you can see, it's that they've stayed really nice and clean, which I'm happy with. There's no metal, there's no debris or anything like that. The only thing I will say is, be careful when you're lifting stuff off, keep it all together. What I actually want to get to is this nozzle on the end. I've actually bought a replacement one. I've been told that it is good for these guns to have that nozzle replaced. There's a bit of movement in the end of actually this one that's on here. So what I'm going to do is just lift this top cylinder out. I'll just lift that all off together there, then you'll be able to see all that come off as one unit. Leave the gearbox to one side for a moment, just slide that up and take this off. So inside here you've got your piston body and piston head. A little bit of grease on the end of there, other than that nothing to worry about. As you can see, very nice and clean inside, in even the internals and even the metal underside as well. Very clean, full metal as well, when this is standard Ares internals, so that's metal all the way down. You can see some of these that are on other models are plastic, and like the first two teeth are metal or whatever, but full metal with the Ares one. So slide that off. What we actually want to get to is this. And this is the nozzle that's going to go into your hop unit. I'm just going to wipe the grease off my hands before I get the new one. And what I've actually decided to buy is one that is a little bit nicer material. It's metal, it's a little bit wider. So in comparison, you can see the two there. And one has actually got an O-ring inside it. This one, the new metal one, and this one hasn't, so it allows a little bit of play, and it's a little bit chewed up now, that one, so I'm just going to place this over the top, and there is a much more snug fit on there, with no movement at all, whereas with this plastic one there's a little bit of rattling there. Hopefully the video picks that up. It slides back and forth nicely, but not much a little bit of rattle, whereas this slides back and forth, but at the same time there's much less rattle there. So hopefully that will give us a slightly better air seal. What I'm going to do is just clean this nozzle off on the front, so just a bit of tissue in there, make sure that there's no dirt or debris or anything like that underneath it, and then we can get back to putting this gun back together. So what I'm using here also is Abbey silicone oil. I've had this pot of Abbey silicone oil for years now, for a very, very long time. Just going to put a little bit of on that as a bit of lubricant, and then slide that over. Just work it around the sides. Does sound a little bit tight, but I think that'll be okay. Definitely better. I mean, it doesn't move that much, this front air nozzle, but definitely a much better air seal on there. That's definitely for sure. So, right, let's start getting this back together then. Otherwise, this video is going to be super, super long. Okay, so getting this back together. I'm just going to move this piston in and put the cylinder back inside the piston. Again, it's very, very clean. I will wipe some of this out though, saying that, and just get a bit of tissue in there, give it a good wiping out, just to make sure that you're carrying this little debris into your barrel, because obviously that's where all this air is going to come from. So if we can get that nice and clean, it's probably going to do us a bit of a bonus. Another thing to do, if you can, pull a bit of cotton wool off the end of a cotton bud, and just stick that in the end. Just give that a bit of a clean in there. And as you can see, the dirt that's come out of there, just to keep it nice and clean, so you can see a little bit of dirt on the end of that. And let's go back to getting this back together. So move that onto there, and then we're going to pinch this onto the base of that, get our cylinder back inside the piston, lay that on top. There's a little hole this end, and there's a hole on the other side as well, and what they do is they align with the actual body itself. We've got this little spring here. Don't forget this is really important. Your gun's not going to function very well without this, but don't attach it yet. And what you want to do is bring your piston out, align your piston with the teeth on your gearbox. So if you lift this, you can spin this gear. It should spin fairly freely, and what you want to do is put it on the first step of the cycle, and that's going to enable you to get the gun back together much easier. So what you can actually do is turn this, actually watch the gun in motion. So as this turns, you get the full rotation of your cylinder. It will then break, and then you can return that back to make sure that it's going to return back into the right place. So we're going to turn this again. As you can see, piston moving freely. Just want to make sure that that is all aligned correctly. So just turn that in there again, give that one more go. And that works perfect. As you can see, bring the piston all the way back, and then all the way back forward into the gun again. So what I always do is set the gun up like that. This is the most tricky bit, and it might take a few tries to get it, but this is under spring load. So what I do is just pin that back. We have got a very tiny little washer in here, which hopefully you can see in the video. I'm just going to slide that back over and get this main gear back in. Can be a little bit fiddly. Once that's back in, best thing to do is just to keep your hand on top of there and try and hold that into place. We've got our little connector here for the batteries, and to make sure, and this is where your motor actually comes into the body of the gun. So if you can just be very gentle at this stage, hold that into place, put your trigger back in, so the nub just fits in like that. You can hear a nice little positive click, and that's under spring load as well. So what we want to do now is start attaching up the backs of the springs. So I'm going to move everything out of the way. You can see it nice and clearly. Everything back in there, as you can see from Ares, really, really nice and clean in there. And I do try and keep the guns nice and clean inside. I mean, at the end of the day, that is what's going to keep them working nice. Use a little screwdriver like this. First one, to pull this main spring out. It is going to be quite tight, so pull everything over, and then just, if you can, just slide that off onto the pin. It is a bit tricky. It's not an easy thing to do. It will go over like that with a little bit of force. You might find that holds that plate a little bit above the top. You want to make sure really that that is spun round enough that it's not going to catch it. So what we'll do is we'll just spin our gears round. Let's remove that a sec. And we'll spin this all the way. Oh, there's going to be a little bit of force under this now because of the air seal. What I'll do is I'll bring that all the way back. Make sure that all lines up okay. It does. So put that all the way out. Lay that in there, so we know that that's going to go back together. Sorry, a bit quiet there. This is a little bit fiddly, but as you can see, the main bits go back together quite easily. It's not massively tricky. The hard bit is actually getting the case back on. What we'll do is just get all these springs back together. It might end up being quite a long video, because this is quite fiddly. That off there. Might take a couple of tries just to get this right, but we will get there eventually. We go. So that is now in place. Quite tricky to get on that little spring, I must admit. Let's get this back in. Right, okay, so we are now pretty much all ready to go back together. Get your top casing for the gearbox. Lay that over the top. And what we want to do is just make sure that any washers that you have are still in place on this side. Haven't got much grease in mine. I do like to run it, not dry exactly, but you know, I don't like it gopping in grease. The next bit is to try and get everything aligned. So guys, just dropped the casing on. Everything seems to be working fine. Nice responsiveness from the trigger. Have managed to drop one of these little collars, so I'm just going to put that back in. So everything else is in together. One thing you won't have is the collar for the smaller screw that sits in here, so don't panic if you haven't got that. What we're going to do now is I've put everything back inside the gun. Don't run much grease in there, a little bit of silicone oil if anything, and what you can do is drop that on from this side. So I always drop a little bit of silicone oil in those. Start screwing everything back together is the next thing really. So what we've done is we've laid our screws out nicely here, so we can just pinch them back up and screw that all back together. But once that gearbox is back together like so, just nip round to make sure that everything's nice and tight. Give it a little, a little extra quarter turn on everything, and then all of your gearbox screws, just make sure that they are all nice and tight. The last thing you want is your gearbox coming apart in the middle of the game. and that is all nicely pinched back together. The next thing to do is to get this back into the body.
So guys, in essence for time, I've speeded up the footage above. It's very, very simple to get the gun back together from here. If you need to, jump back to the earlier stages of the footage and just check out, make sure you're doing everything correctly. It is an easy process getting it back in the gun. Hopefully you found this breakdown helpful. I know it's a very long video, but should be really helpful. Some of you guys trying to get your guns apart. As you can see, the Ares is a great platform with very, very solid internals. If you do have any questions, drop them in the box below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all soon.